The strength has been answered.
We had a request to turn the lights off. Can we do that?
Nope.
We can do that.
It's fine by me.
Okay.
There's no canoodling in the dark just because the lights are all on.
Jim is happy.
All right, so we're here to talk about the SS United States, but before I do that, I'm going to kind of go into a little bit of background about our program and some of the projects we've done over the last few years to build up to this and what we have on the horizon before the SS United States is deployed later this year. So I'm Alex Fogg. I'm the Natural Resources Chief for Okaloosa County. We've grown our program from one person up to a team of 8 now. We manage everything from coastal systems all the way up to land systems now, and I know nothing about land. Fortunately, we've brought enough people on board that are doing an awesome job, and I still get to dive every once in a while, not nearly as much as I used to. This is the core 3. This is myself, Mike, and Jessica. They're on the coastal side of things, and this picture should have a lot more people now. But we haven't had pictures since all these new people came on board. But everything that we do is funded by tourism tax dollars. So for every dollar that's spent in a hotel in this destination, as well as Okaloosa County, Destin Fort Walton Beach, we collect 6% of that $1, so 6 cents. We're talking over $30 million per year that goes into our budget for marketing and other things, including artificial reef construction, lionfish removal, other research projects that we deem worthy and that we can tie back to tourism. So as long as we can tie these projects back to tourism, it's an easy sell. Unfortunately, we have leadership that's very, very supportive of what we do. So going into the artificial reefs and a little bit of a background. So we have over 500 public artificial reefs, and those could be anything from a large shipwreck to some of those pyramids that have been deployed in recent years, and a whole lot of those. Those satisfy the fishermen, but if you get in enough clusters, they're also a great dive site. Or if you're just wanting to dive a real quick spot to get your snapper or some lionfish, they're good too. We also have a private artificial reef program. So we're really the only active county in the state of Florida, one of 2 in the entire country, that allows people to deploy their own artificial reefs. So we have 3 federal permits, over 100 square miles of area off our coast that we allow people to go and deploy reefs where they want to. They still have to report the numbers to us, but I don't need the numbers. We don't publish them. We just use them to be able to tell the regulatory agencies, yes, these people did what they said they were going to do. And we have to go and inspect that material prior to it being deployed. But the fishermen know that, we're trying to make it work for them, so they actually follow the rules because they don't want to mess it up for everybody else. Chicken coops are by far what they deploy. They're just so easy to handle, bring offshore and deploy. We've been acquiring a whole bunch of secondary use concrete, so a bunch of culverts and things, and we're actually providing that to captains to go and deploy on their own if they want to. Because as opposed to it just sitting in our yard and, we take a long time to deploy it, we give it to them to at least get some habitat in the water, and it provides something awesome for them as well. Of those 500-something vessels, 16 of those are large vessels that we've deployed in the last 4.5 years. So we've been really putting an emphasis on getting large vessels, anything over 60 feet long, up to about 400 feet long, deployed off our coast to encourage diving. Fishermen don't care what goes on the bottom. They just want structure. The fish don't really care what's on the bottom for the most part. They just want structure. But divers want to come to a destination to be a wreck diver if they don't have a bunch of pretty coral. So we're really trying to encourage people to come to our destination and for us to become a dive destination like some of our other counties or some of the other counties in the state of Florida have done over favor in previous years. We're also trying to deploy these large vessels at depths that are accessible to divers. I'd much rather have a vessel out in 150 feet of water, being able to hit the top and also go down to the bottom if I want to. But the majority of divers want stuff as shallow as possible. They'd love it sticking out of the water if we could make that happen. But that's not feasible. There's a lot of requirements by the regulatory agencies specifically associated with clearance. So we have to make sure that essentially the vessel or the structure is at least 1/2 the water depth away from the surface. So if we're in 100 feet of water, it needs to be 50 feet below the surface. If we're in 50 feet of water, it needs to be 25 feet below the surface. That's in general. In some cases, there's actually a hard number, but it's about 1/2 the water depth. So if we have that huge wreck like the SS United States, we can't go and put that in 100 feet of water. The thing's 130 feet tall. So you got to put it out in pretty deep water, but fortunately the majority of that wreck will be very much within recreational limits. And I'll send this presentation to everybody afterwards so you can actually see some of the data that I'm talking about. One of the cool things is since we've been doing so much in artificial reefs, we actually have people coming to us wanting to work with us, partner with us to create artificial reefs. CCA, Yamaha, wine companies, high schools, people are dumping tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars into our program to help with artificial reef construction. So when I can go to my commissioners and be like, hey, I want $200,000 to sink this wreck, but guess what? I have another $150,000 from these partners over here. That makes it very easy for them to say yes. Not only does it get a lot of attention and a lot of thumbs up from the community and the people that are coming to the destination, but they didn't have to spend a bunch of extra tax dollars to make that happen. So this is probably the coolest collaboration that we have going on. This is the Courageous. It used to be a 180-foot or so freighter. The military took a bomb and blew it up. It sank in about 7 seconds. It's a lot more efficient way to sink a vessel than how we do it. But this is the first time that a public entity like a county has worked with the military on a military mission such as this. So the military is allowed to blow things up. But once they blow it up, they need to recover it, bring it back to land and dispose of it properly, unless it's being used for public purpose. So in the case of these large vessels, once it hits the bottom, and if it's in a diveable area or a diveable depth, it can be used by the public. So we're able to get that waiver from the EPA to be able to do this. So this is the first time this happened. We clean it to all the same artificial reef standards and then give it to the military to do what they want. So we've done 3 wrecks like this. One was blown up in half. The other one was a weapon went off just next to it, so it kind of missed, but it cracked the hull, and it sank perfectly upright, almost like we did it. And then the most recent one, it cracked the hull again, but it flipped upside down. So all still great structures underwater. Some of them are really interesting, some of them not so much. But we're hoping that this program continues into the future, and it looks like it will. This is also where we piloted our photogrammetry work. So Reef Smart Guides is a group that came up back in 2020, I think, and we went around all of Northwest Florida and mapped a whole bunch of wrecks. The process at the time was literally taking a bunch of pictures and just measuring things, and then they'd go back and essentially draw it in a program and get kind of close, and those wrecks looked pretty good. But now they're using photogrammetry, so they're taking tens of thousands of photos of a structure, putting it into a computer program that develops these 3-dimensional models. We can then take those and put them online and make them interactive. So this is what the Courageous, that one you just saw that got blown up, that was the first time we did this. And we were able to provide this to the military, which they loved, because they could provide that to their higher ups and be like, look what we did. And so that was a great benefit to the military, but also great to all the people who are coming to dive in our destination to see what they're gonna dive, as well as people who maybe don't dive to see what's actually on the bottom. We can also use this for research purposes. So we're actually, once a vessel hits the bottom, we model it within a month, and then we'll go back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road and see how that vessel is changing, whether it be growth growing to it or attaching to it, settling on it, or how it's breaking down over time. And that'll inform us on what materials maybe are best at what depths. So sticking on that collaboration, Destin Water Users is basically who does all the pipes and things in our area. They donated a bunch of material. Eglin Air Force Base donated a bunch of concrete targets that they used on land to test some of their ordnance, and we deployed about 1,000 tons of it all in one big pile. We're getting a ton of concrete from Eglin, Destin Water Users, and other people, and it's all great material when you can make these big piles, but the cost of these projects are outrageous. Secondary use concrete to deploy is not cheap. It's a lot easier for you to just deploy a bunch of modules or even a wreck for that matter. That 1,000 tons costs like $350,000 to deploy, which is a lot. So while it's a great feel-good story to collaborate with these people and get rid of their waste material, it's not the most financially responsible thing for us. Again, Destin High School, local restaurants, a local nonprofit that does a whole bunch of artificial reef construction. Starborough Wine, based out of California, wanted to do some coral reef restoration in Destin Fort Walton Beach. We don't have coral like you would think down in the Keys, like that kind of restoration, so we steered them in direction of artificial reefs. They loved it. They've come back 2 years now to do about $20,000 worth of artificial reef construction, and they do a big campaign with their wine. Has anyone ever drank Starborough wine? It's like it has a starfish on it, so yeah, that's their tie to the marine environment. The Deep Sim 3, this is one that we worked on with Walton County and Bay County. So this was a 260, 280 foot vessel that was procured from Louisiana. The total project cost was $750,000. Sounds like a lot of money, but when you split it across 3 counties where each of us only pay $250,000, and then get nonprofits like South Walton Artificial Reef Association, Emerald Coast Reef Association, CCA, and some others to fund some additional modules on the back, it really makes for a really cool project that's cost effective for everybody. And it's relatively equal distance between St. Andrews Pass and Destin Pass. The only reason it's not perfectly equal distance is because we don't have a permitted area or a place that we can put it that's right in the middle. But I know that a lot of the boats over here have gone to the deep stem, and most of our boats are going out there for a lot of their advanced or technical diving. Really cool spot. Some of those modules actually fell off the back during the deployment. So if you want to find a bunch of lionfish, go to the back. That's where they all hang out. We also got a whole bunch of money from BP, really all of Northwest Florida. All the counties got an initial slug of $1 to $2 million back in 2015. And then we just got another round of about $1 million per county. And we used those funds to actually pilot some 3D printed reefs. So there's some companies out there that use concrete, 3D printed concrete to create houses. And they wanted to get into the environmental space. So they proposed to us creating artificial reefs with 3D printed concrete. We came up with this design, they call it the sea hives. It's kind of like a beehive. We deployed, I don't know, a dozen of them, something like that. 18 of them. They're performing really, really well. The issue is it's not cost effective yet. So we spent more than what we would spend on, let's say, a super pyramid, but we wanted to see how they would perform. So we're hoping that maybe that technology will develop over time, or maybe we can order a whole bunch at one time to get a more cost effective option. But if you have a chance to dive some of these out of Destin, they're all in state water, so they're relatively shallow, nice to go see, and they're performing really well, lots of critters. Skip and Sue, this was on Monday. This photo isn't sideways, it landed on its side. It happens sometimes. Unfortunately, we didn't cut enough holes in the stern of the vessel. It actually went down bow first. So once it hit the bottom, the bow just kind of floated around because there was a bunch of trapped air, and the current slowly pushed onto its side, and when it sank, it landed on its side. Not a big deal for the fish, not a big deal for the fishermen, and divers may like the vessel upright, but the folks that have gone out there so far say it's a pretty cool site. And there's already a bunch of fish on it. Some Goliath group are already moved in. It's within a quarter mile of another vessel that's been out there for a couple years, so it's already pulling a lot of cool stuff. And it's in 77 feet of water. It comes up to 51 feet of water, so it's a pretty easy dive for folks. And again, it's in close proximity to another vessel that we deployed 2 summers ago, so that if you go out there and there's someone fishing or diving that site, you can go over to this one. And in about a month, we're going to deploy another one out in that site. So there'll be 3 structures or 3 large vessels within very close proximity to each other to try and spread that effort out. On the same vein, again, this was a huge undertaking. We took all those NERTA funds, so a couple $1 million, and put them into a bunch of modules, and we put them in 100 feet of water all the way out to over 300 feet of water. And these are the deepest modules that have been deployed in Northwest Florida. So while they're a little bit out of reach of divers, or at least maybe divers that want to go to 300 feet aren't going to be going to go see a pyramid, but the fishermen are very, very happy. So these are going to be outstanding sites for the fishing community, and hopefully keep them off of some of those shallower sites that everybody likes to go and dive. All right, so some of the upcoming projects is things that we have really in the next 2 months. We have 2 vessels that are sitting over in Port St. Joe. They're the Necton Pilot and Necton Royal Quoll. Those are the 2 dive boats that used to go all over the Caribbean doing all sorts of liveaboard stuff. You've been on them? Yep. Yeah, so pretty cool. So they got caught up in some BP litigation back in 2010 and been sitting in the ditch over there in Port St. Joe for, gosh, I don't know, 10 plus years. The court finally said, you're not getting anything, you got to get rid of them. They're about to scrap them, so they offered them up for artificial reefs. We waited our turn. They finally trickled to us, and we have finished the cleaning process. We just had them on hold while we were dealing with the SS United States, but they're going to be going down probably in the next 2 weeks. The Spirit of Norfolk is a 188-foot vessel that we towed down from Norfolk at the same time as the Skip and Sue. But on our way down here, the military called us and said, hey, we need another target ASAP. So we said, sure, just give us what we have in the vessel and it can be yours for a target. So they cut a check, paid for it, and when we got it here to Destin, they met us out there with a tugboat, took it off our hands, we went and sunk the Skip and Sue, and then they're gonna blow it up in 3 weeks. So we'll get another reef out there in 120 feet, which is great. And then we'll take those funds that we saved and put them towards another two vessels if we can find them. Then we also have the Fantasy, and that's a 144-foot vessel. It's an old casino boat. It doesn't look like a paddle wheel or anything. It kind of looks like an icebreaker. That's going to be deployed right next to where the Skip and Sue is and where the Atlantis is. So in state waters, it'll come all the way up to 36 feet. So it's going to be very, very shallow, very accessible. The hurricanes are going to wreak havoc on this thing, but everybody wants shallow stuff, so we're gonna make it happen. And lastly, the United States, and that's what everyone's here for. Everybody heard of the United States? Yeah. Not the America, not the strength, but the United States. It's 990 feet long. The reason why it's not 1,000 feet long is because at the time, the largest vessel that could go through the Panama City, or not Panama City, the Panama Canal was 1,000 feet. So they made it a little bit shorter to be able to do that. It actually never went through the Panama Canal, which is an interesting fact. It's very, very tall. So from the keel all the way to the top of the funnels or the smokestacks, it's 175 feet tall, which is why we're cutting off the smokestacks. The smokestacks will be preserved for the museum. There's gonna be a land-based museum, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that brings it down to about 125, 130 feet to the whole top deck. So about 600 feet of the vessel will be at 55 to 60 feet below the surface. So very accessible to the recreational diver. And then the technical guys can go down and look at the side of the ship, look at the props, or where the props used to be. You know, the props have all been removed. But it'll be a very accessible spot for a lot of divers. It still holds the record for crossing the Atlantic, going over, as well as coming back, which is pretty cool. It was very, very fast. And it was built to accommodate 2,000 passengers, but it was also built to be able to be converted into a troop-carrying ship very, very quickly, to where it could carry 14,000 troops. The reason why that was important is back in World War I and World War II, they needed troops over in Europe, and it would take a week and a half for them to get over there. So they wanted to create a vessel that, in the event of a World War III, they could get 14,000 troops over there in 3.5 days. Fortunately, it never had to be converted, but because they did that, they were able to get a crap load of federal funds to build this thing. So more than half the vessel cost was covered by the federal government because it was able to be converted into a troop-carrying ship. It's carried a bunch of presidents, Walt Disney, the Mona Lisa, and it actually made its appearance over here in the United States for a little while, so it's certainly famous. It was put into service back in 1952, but it was retired in 1969, which doesn't sound like a really long time, right? But if you think about the other ocean liners at the time, I mean, the Titanic lasted, 3 days or something? All those other ocean liners got torpedoed, hit a mine, hit each other. So ocean liners really didn't last long during that time. So the fact that it actually got retired and has been moored up for all this time is pretty impressive. So it was essentially mothballed. It went into military surplus in '69. They put a bunch of dehumidifiers on it and just left it alone, just in case they needed to bring it out of retirement to make it that troop-carrying ship in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. It eventually was sold, and it ended up going over to the Mediterranean, went to Turkey and Ukraine, where it was gutted. All the asbestos was taken off, all the non-metal stuff was taken out of the guts of the ship, with the hopes of being able to bring it up to modern standards and put it back into service. It then was sold to Norwegian Cruise Lines, and then a couple other groups bought it and floundered around with it. None of that worked, so they abandoned the idea, realized it was too much frickin' money even during that time, shipped it back to the United States, was in Virginia for a little while, a bunch of stuff got auctioned off, then it made it up to Philadelphia, where it was at for 30 years. The SS United States Conservancy, who was the owner for about 12, 15 years of that time, and who we bought it from, bought it with the idea that they could turn it into a landside museum, apartments, restaurant, kind of like what the Queen Mary is out in California, if any of you have been to that. Unfortunately, all those plans kind of fell through. I mean, it was $1 billion restoration effort to get it to a point to where people could actually be on it, to where they could put it at a dock. You need to find a dock that could accommodate a 1,000-foot vessel, and that was willing to take on the risk of having a 1,000-foot vessel in their port. New York was close, they abandoned it, and it's just been a roller coaster really the entire time that this vessel was around. It got to a point to where the dock owner in Philadelphia wanted to up the rent from $800 a day to $1,600 a day. Sounds like a lot. When we took over, we started paying $5,000 a day, and now we're spending $3,500 a day in Mobile. So it's expensive to put a 1,000-foot ship in a port somewhere. There's very few, and it's just you're hogging their entire port. But anyways, the port, the Penn Warehousing up in Philadelphia wanted more rent because they were paying 1990s prices in 2024, 2025. The Conservancy said, no, we're going to keep paying $800 a month. $800 a day. The Penn Warehousing then brought it to court, went to federal court. The judge said, Conservancy, you don't owe those extra dollars, but you have 90 days to get out of there. There was not another port for that vessel to go to. Or maybe there was, but they didn't want a vessel to just sit in their port for another 30 years, clogging up their waterfront. So that's where we entered the picture. We had been following this for about 2.5 years by that time, and we engaged the conservancy and said, hey, we'd like to turn this into an artificial reef. We'd like to work with you on establishing a museum and honoring this vessel well beyond its time on the surface and continue to break records with it underwater. What they didn't understand, they thought once we put it underwater, this thing is gone, it'll break down in 5 years, you'll never see it again. It's gonna outlive everybody in this room, it's gonna outlive me, it's gonna be here long after we're gone. So after a lot of back and forth, about 57 different drafts of a contract, we came to an agreement. And we took ownership of the SS United States in mid-October. It was a long road to get to that point, but that was really just the beginning of an even bigger shit show, excuse my language, in Philadelphia from October to when we got it to Mobile in March. I'm probably skipping ahead, I'm not even doing the slides. We did a whole bunch of due diligence before we took ownership of it. So we actually hired a contractor to get on board, sample a ton of paint, go through all the fuel tanks to see what sort of nasties we were dealing with. Fortunately, the paint was relatively clean. It's not lead that we're worried about. Lead isn't that big of a deal. It's the PCBs, things that they used to put, additives they used to put in paint back in the 70s and before that are very, very bad in the environment. And we were expecting a whole bunch of this paint to have that. Fortunately, that's not the case. Most of the floor coverings have that, and that has to be remediated appropriately. But the cost of the PCB remediation is minimal. What the major cost is disposing of all of the fuel oil and contaminated water on board. So when it was in Philadelphia, in order to pay dockage, they were actually taking the old fuel oil off, selling it, and then filling those tanks with water. So while we aren't recovering a bunch of oil, it's still contaminated water that has to be disposed of just like you would oil or fuel. So it's millions of gallons of fuel oil or contaminated water that we're having to dispose of. So that sucks. And we don't get to sell any of that off, so we don't recoup any costs, which stinks. There's some, but not much. There was a lot of coordination with the U.S. Coast Guard, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, the bridge authorities. Every possible agency in Philadelphia wanted their piece. And it was tough, especially with the public being very upset that we were buying this with the purpose of creating an artificial reef with it. They called everyone that they knew and made it very, very difficult for us to leave. The Coast Guard thought that once we left port, this thing was going to sink right in the middle of the Delaware River. Or if we were lucky enough to make it out to the Atlantic, it was going to flip upside down and kill everybody on the tugboat. I mean, these are all things that came up in meetings. It was wild. So we had the burden of proof to show them that this vessel was stable, the hull was intact, and it was able to make the tow from Philadelphia to Mobile. And it did. We'll talk about that in a second. So total project cost, $10.1 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but if you think about the USS Texas over in Galveston, it's having its hull repaired for almost $300 million. Just the hull, that's it. And we're stripping this thing down and bringing it offshore to deploy as an artificial reef. So that $10.1 million includes $1 million for the purchase. So we bought the ship for $1 million. $1 million to contribute to their museum. That's going to be land-based in Destin, Fort Walton Beach. Then $7.1 million is for the towing, the insurance, the remediation, and the deployment of the vessel. So at $3,500 a day, as you just keeping it there, you can see how these costs rack up very quickly. And then another $1 million for contingency. And I'll tell you right now, that contingency is running pretty low based on all the additional requirements that the Coast Guard threw at us up in Philadelphia and all the additional time that we had to spend up there. But $10.1 million is not that much. The Oriskany was, I think, $25 million, and that was in 2006 numbers and took 4 years to get sunk. We bought it in October, and we're going to have it down probably around October, so 1 year, which is pretty good. So the tow route, it's very far, 1,600 miles from Philly down to Mobile in February. The Atlantic is a very angry place in February. So we had restriction based on the analysis that we had done by the marine architects. They required us to not set sail if the seas were greater than, I think, 15 feet or something like that. So, okay, that's fine. So we found a weather window that jived with our schedule, that jived with what the 10-day forecast was and the availability of the tugs, availability of the support tugs to get us down the river, which I might add costs just as much as the tow from just outside the mouth of the river all the way down to Mobile. So just the tugs to get us down the river cost as much as it did for the remaining 10, 12 days of that tow. The average tow speed is about 6-7 knots. So that sounds slow, but for a single tugboat with a mile of tow cable it was actually pretty fast. So bridge clearance was a major question as well. So it had to go underneath 3 bridges leaving Philadelphia. The first bridge, at high tide, it would hit it. So we had to wait for low tide. Fortunately, in Philadelphia, there's 2 tides, 2 highs, 2 lows, and the tidal swing is anywhere from 7 to 10 feet. So we could wait for low tide to get underneath the bridge. And this kind of highlights how close we were. It was about a 6-foot clearance. We waited for that low tide. The good news is we actually had a crazy strong north wind the days leading up to it, and it actually delayed our departure, but that blew a lot of the water out of the Delaware River. So we actually had a little bit more water clearance, or a little more air clearance to get underneath the bridge. But the Coast Guard and the Bridge Authority were like, well, you guys have to test and see if the vessel can make it underneath the bridge. We're like, well, how did it get there? So we still had to pay, tens of thousands of dollars for a group to come out and tell us that it'll make it under the bridge. And we knew it would, but whatever. That's, just another one of the challenges we had to overcome. Yep, talking about that's the title chart, just looking at how ridiculous it was. Oh, and they wouldn't let us go during rush hour. So we couldn't leave between 6 and 9 a.m. or between 3 and 6 p.m. because people pull over on the side of the interstate to watch ships go underneath the bridge. And it becomes an unsafe situation. Not because they're worried about us hitting it, but because people just stop in the middle of the frickin' interstate to take a look. When we first took ownership back in October, we were ready to go. Like, this was before we did any of the tests and before all the regulatory stuff started happening. But we took ownership in October, and as you recall, there were a lot of crazy storms coming into the Gulf, right in the middle of what our tow track was, so we couldn't leave. Unfortunately, that gave the Coast Guard and a lot of those other regulatory agencies time to think, time to receive phone calls, and that's when the captain of the port orders started. And what a captain of the port order is basically the Coast Guard saying, you can't leave until you do this, 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 this. And then we'd do those things, and they'd give us another one. So they were constantly moving these goalposts to prevent us from getting out of there in a reasonable amount of time. They were scared. They were also getting a lot of pushback from their constituents. I won't talk any more bad about the Coast Guard. It was just really tough. But here's, all these different hurricane paths, and that's our tow route. I mean, it was right smack dab in the middle of where we were trying to go, and it's not good to put a 1,000-foot vessel that doesn't have any sort of steerage in the middle of a hurricane. Captain Porter stuff, all right. Another challenge I'll talk about. So this is actually the SS United States off the Outer Banks. Really, really cool photo. It was when a major cold front was coming through. It was like 15 degrees out, but the water temperature was 60 because we were right in the middle of the Gulf Stream. So you had this like fog coming off the water. It was really, really cool. The captain was able to get a whole bunch of photos, and a lot of those went viral during the tow. It was also probably the most stressful point of the tow because at that point, they were 2 days into it. This is the first of the weather that they were experiencing, and while the naval architect said everything was going to be